I'm going to be upfront about one thing before I tell you this story. The thumbnail image that came with this request shows a completely different scenario, a grandmother revealing she bought a house at an anniversary dinner, and that has nothing to do with the script you gave me about the family fund and the group text. Since the title and script you provided are clearly the real story you want rewritten, I've built the piece around that one, using your title exactly as given, so the thumbnail and the actual content line up honestly instead of me inventing a fake grandma subplot to force a match that was never really there. My name is Rachel Bennett, and I was 34 years old the night my parents cut me out of my own family through a group text message sent at 42 minutes past 7 on an ordinary Tuesday to a thread of 12 people, and it read simply, "We think it is best you step away for now." And my mother's older sister, Aunt Linda, answered it with nothing but a thumbs-up reaction sitting under those words like a rubber stamp on a form nobody had bothered to read closely. I sat at my kitchen table reading that sentence until my phone screen dimmed on its own, and when I finally typed something back, it was short. Understood. I'll respect that, and I'll step away from the family fund too. That same night, I closed my end of it. By 2 in the morning, my phone would not stop buzzing, and by the time the sun came up, there were 89 missed calls waiting for me. I only played one voicemail, my father's, asking what happened, saying the bank had flagged everything. I wrote back one line, "I'm honoring your decision," and that was where the real story began, because what none of them understood that night was that the family fund had been the smallest piece of what I was carrying, and it would take my family a full month, piece by piece, to discover the rest. I run a small bookkeeping office in a 2-room space above a hardware store on Front Street in a town called Millbrook, Ohio, with my assistant Priya and a coffee maker older than either of us. Numbers are how I earn a living, and honestly, they're how I understand people, because a ledger never flatters anyone, it only tells you what actually happened, which is more honesty than most families manage. I grew up 12 minutes away, across the river bridge, in a white house on Chestnut Hill Road with a porch swing my father built the summer I turned 9. My dad, Walter, spent 31 years as the service manager at a Ford dealership downtown, and he believed in oil changes and God, roughly in that order. My mother, Diane, ran the women's ministry at our church and ran our family's reputation the way a general runs a war, with maps nobody else was allowed to see. My brother Todd is 3 years older than me, fixes furnaces for a living, has a wife named Jenna and 2 kids, a good heart, and absolutely no patience for paperwork. Then there's Aunt Linda, my mother's younger sister, who has agreed with whoever spoke to her last since sometime around 1975. From the outside, we looked like a solid family, Sunday dinners, matching photos every Easter, a casserole delivered to every grieving porch in the county. I trusted us the way you trust a bridge you drive over every single day, without ever once checking underneath it. 6 years before that awful group text, I found a piece of county mail sitting in the kitchen junk drawer that showed me what our family actually ran on underneath all that polish. I had gone digging for batteries and found instead the truth about everything. It was Father's Day of that year, and the dealership had closed that spring, called a corporate consolidation, which is just a fancy way of saying that 31 years of my father's working life fit inside one cardboard box. He was 57 then, too young for Social Security and too old for anyone new to want to hire him, and far too proud to admit either of those things out loud. That evening after dinner, our television remote died, and while I was rooting through the same drawer that had held twine and dead pens since before I was born, I found an open envelope from the county treasurer, stamped in red. Delinquent property taxes, just over $4,900, past due. I stood there holding a pack of batteries in one hand and what felt like my entire childhood in the other. Through the window, I could see my father out in the garage, wiping down a workbench that was already spotless. I walked out there and showed him the envelope, and he looked at it the way a man looks at a bad diagnosis. He told me quietly that the pension buyout had come to almost nothing, pennies on the dollar after the lawyers took their cut, and that he was behind on the county behind on the electric bill, and a payment behind on a home equity line I hadn't even known existed. Then he said the sentence that would shape the next 6 years of my life, that your mother can never know the real number. She can't handle being seen that way. I asked him how bad things would get by spring, and he just picked the rag back up and wiped that same clean spot again. And that silence was answer enough. We built the arrangement together that weekend in the garage, quietly, the way you build anything you don't want the kitchen to know about. I opened a checking account in my name only and privately called it the family fund. On the first of every month, $2,400 would move out of that account into my parents', time to land before the home equity payment, the electric bill, and the insurance draft all came due. I paid the property taxes straight to the county myself twice a year, so no red envelope would ever sit in that drawer again. My father had one condition, and he said it with his palm flat on the workbench like he was swearing an oath, that your mother can never know how much, and nobody else can know it all. I was 28 years old, and I said yes before he even finished the sentence. Here's the part that still amazes me as a professional bookkeeper. The cover story wasn't mine or my father's. It was my mother's own invention. Within a month, Diane had announced to the whole extended family that she was starting a cheerful little family fund, a rainy day kitty for holidays and emergencies. Everybody pitch in what you can. Aunt Linda dropped in $25 every Christmas and felt wonderful about it. Todd threw in $50 whenever his tax refund landed. And whenever anyone in town wondered how Walter and Diane were holding up since the dealership closed, my mother would smile serenely and say that Frank's retirement had turned out just fine. She never once asked me a single question about the real account. In 6 years, that woman contributed nothing but casseroles and a slogan, and somehow she became the manager of the entire story. I did the math on that far too late, that sometimes the person who contributes the least is the one who gets to decide what the money means to everyone else. 72 firsts of the month, that's what 6 years adds up to for someone who counts for a living, and I count. $2,400 every single month, quiet as a heartbeat. When my parents' furnace died 2 years before that final blow-up, the fund paid for a new one, just over $6,000, installed by my brother's company at cost, under a warranty Todd never once questioned. When the roof started leaking into the attic, I covered half of it, about $4,800, and my father told everyone he had been saving up for it himself. The fund refilled my mother's arthritis medication every month. It kept the truck insured. It even floated my brother's tool loan the winter his work van broke down, though he thanked our parents for that one, and they let him believe it. Meanwhile, I drove a 12-year-old sedan and kept renting the same small apartment above my office, always telling myself a Real house could wait just one more year, and then one more after that. I want to be clear that I wasn't naive about any of it. In the second year, I sat my father down and pushed hard to bring the arrangement into the open, to tell Todd, to split the load, to make it an honest family plan. He wouldn't budge. His mother had raised him on some old vow after a family embarrassment I only half understood, something about charity and shame, and he told me flatly that if I ever made this public, he would go straight to a predatory lender before he'd let my mother be embarrassed. I had seen the kind of lenders circling him, smiling at 14% interest, so I swallowed the smaller cost and kept writing quiet checks instead. It held steady like that for 6 years, my invisible arithmetic propping up everybody's feet, until my brother decided to expand his business. It was Father's Day again, the 21st of June this past summer, burgers on the grill in the backyard. My father in the apron we'd bought him a decade earlier, my mother orbiting the picnic table with a pitcher of lemonade and her usual stage direction. Somewhere between the potato salad and the cake, Todd stood up and announced he was opening a second furnace shop out near the edge of the county. Jenna squeezed his arm. The kids cheered because he did, and then my mother, glowing like a woman unveiling a prize, announced that she and my father were lending him $25,000 to get it started, straight from their savings. From savings. I sat perfectly still with a paper plate balanced on my knee because I knew to the dollar what my parents actually had in savings, and it was nothing because I was their savings. That $25,000 didn't exist yet. Not really. It existed in 72 future firsts of the month that hadn't happened. In my old car staying alive 5 more years. In the house I would keep on not buying. Nobody had asked me a single thing. They had promised my money to my brother in front of the entire family, as though it were their own. I waited until the cake had been cut, and then I asked as calmly as I knew how whether we could talk about the loan before it was promised to anyone, just the 4 of us, before it was set in stone. That's all I said. You would have thought I'd flipped the picnic table over. Jenna suddenly found her fork fascinating. Todd's ears went red. My mother's smile never moved, though everything behind it did, and she said sweetly that this wasn't the moment. This was a celebration. My father just looked at the grill, and the grill had nothing to offer either. 9 days of silence followed, though I didn't know the count at the time. The family group thread went quiet the way a pond freezes over from the edges inward. Jenna still posted a photo of the kids at the pool, but nobody replied under anything I sent. On the Wednesday, Todd texted me directly with no greeting at all, asking why I always had to run the numbers on people. I stared at that message for a long time because running the numbers was the one thing I had ever truly done for this family, and somehow it had become my crime. I didn't apologize because I hadn't done anything that needed one, and I had learned the hard way that apologizing for the truth just teaches people the truth is negotiable. Instead, I built a plan, 2 pages, plain language, no blame in it, laying out where things stood, what was sustainable and what wasn't, and 3 possible paths forward we could choose together like adults. I intended to ask my parents for an hour some Sunday to lay it all out and finally drag the quiet arrangement into daylight where it could breathe. I never got the chance to schedule it. Instead, I got Aunt Linda's voice echoing through my mother's kitchen every evening that week, because Linda mentioned it later, in that sideways, too late way she has. 2 sisters and a speakerphone deciding what I was on the 9th day, a Tuesday. I had closed the office at 6, made dinner for 1, and was rinsing a pan when my phone lit up on the counter at exactly 42 minutes past 7. The family thread. My mother's phrasing, my father's silence, and every relative I had reading along in real time. We've been talking as a family, it said, and we think it's best you step away for now. We love you, but there's been a lot of tension since Father's Day, and everyone needs space to heal. We hope you'll respect that. It had been sent from my father's phone, but written entirely in my mother's voice. I would know that syrup anywhere. 12 people sat on that thread, my parents, Todd and Jenna, Aunt Linda and her husband, 2 cousins and their spouses, my late grandmother's old landline nobody had ever bothered to remove, and me. Stepped away from my own family on the very same thread we used for birthday wishes and snow day warnings. I watched the message sit there. Then Aunt Linda reacted with a thumbs up, and I laughed, one short, strange sound, alone in my kitchen. That woman had taught my Sunday school class. She had known me since the hospital where I was born. I set the phone down, finished drying my hands, and picked it back up, and my reply took me exactly 1 draft. Understood. I'll respect that, and I'll step away from the family fun too. No negotiation, no paragraph of hurt feelings. If the family had voted me out, then the family could not keep the part of me that paid its bills. That math has to run both directions, or it was never really a family fund at all. It was 11 at night when I opened my laptop. The next transfer was scheduled to go out at midnight, $2,400, what would have been the 73rd first of the month. I canceled it. I canceled the county tax installment payment. I canceled the small auto-pay quietly feeding my mother's pharmacy card. Each click felt like cutting away a year of my life, and the strangest part was how steady my hands stayed through all of it. Then I silenced my phone, and went to bed. At 2:14 in the morning, every system my family never knew existed tried to speak at once. Banks run their overnight batches in those small hours, payments post, transfers land. Machines quietly talk to other machines while the whole county sleeps around them, and that night the machines had bad news to share with each other. My transfer never arrived, so my parents' checking account sat nearly empty when the automatic drafts came calling. The home equity payment reached in and found nothing. The electric bill bounced right behind it, then the insurance draft bounced behind that, and every single failure fired off an alert text to the phone sitting on my father's nightstand, because years earlier I was the one who had set up those alerts for him, being the kind of daughter who thinks of things. Insufficient funds. Payment could not be processed. Action required. On and on through the dark. At 2:15, my own phone began buzzing on the dresser, and I know the exact minute because I peeked at it with one eye, the glare stinging. "Dad," it read. I declined the call. It buzzed again before the screen even finished going dark. I lay there listening to it rattle against the wood, and I want to be honest about what I felt, because it wasn't triumph. It was the strange lightness you feel when you finally set down something heavy and your arms float upward on their own, weightless and a little sick, like your body no longer recognizes its own size. I turned the phone face down and let the buzzing keep time through the rest of the night, patient as rain against a roof. By morning it had a number attached, 89 missed calls by sunrise, 41 from my father, 26 from my mother, 15 from Todd, whose bedtime is normally 9:30, and 7 from Aunt Linda, thumbs up Linda, calling me at 4 in the morning as though we were close. There were panicked texts too, a whole column of them in capital letters, but only a single voicemail, and it was my father's. I had never heard his voice sound like that before, not even the day the dealership closed its doors. He asked me to call him back, asked what had happened, said the bank had flagged everything, the house payment, the lights, all of it, said your mother is just, please call. I sat on the edge of my bed in the gray early light and played that message 3 times, not to enjoy it but to be certain of something, and I was right. In 90 seconds of pure terror, the only question asked was what happened, never what did we do. The bank had flagged everything, like weather, like an act of nature, as though the money that had appeared under them faithfully every month for 6 years was simply a feature of the earth that had inexplicably stopped flowing. My thumb hovered over the screen. There was a version of me they were all counting on, frankly, the version who would have fixed everything by breakfast and apologized for the inconvenience. Instead, I typed one line, "I'm honoring your decision," then put the phone on silent, showered, and opened my office right at 8, because women like me always open at 8 sharp. Priya took one look at my face that morning and made the coffee extra strong. The knock on my door came the very next morning, and of course it wasn't my mother. It was 7:40 when my father showed up at the street entrance to my building, cap held in both hands, working the brim like a rosary, 63 years old, his shirt pressed and his face freshly shaved. A man dressing up to ask his daughter something he would rather die than say out loud. "Your mother doesn't know I'm here," he told me, which in our family is practically a declaration of love. I made him coffee at my little kitchen table upstairs, and he looked around my apartment like he was seeing it for the first time. The second-hand couch, the folding bookshelf, the window unit humming away, and I watched some kind of arithmetic move behind his eyes that had never happened there before. The daughter with nearly $200,000 out the door living like a graduate student. He tried twice to ask me for help, and both times the sentence died of shame right there on the table between us. So I helped him, because 34 years of loving somebody doesn't switch off overnight, and I said I know exactly what's due. "Dad, I'm not doing this to watch you drown." I slid a single sheet of paper across the table listing every bill that used to ride quietly on my back, each one with its amount and its due date written plainly, not a ledger, just a handoff. These are yours now, I told him. You have more time than the alerts make it feel like. Being late is survivable, but pretending is what's expensive. He read it twice from top to bottom, folded it into quarters, and tucked it into his shirt pocket behind the pen, exactly where he had kept everything important since before I was born. At the door, he stopped without turning around and told me my mother had been saying I'd gone through some kind of episode, and then he went down the stairs, and I found out soon after where my mother had actually gone instead of calling me directly. She had gone to church. That Thursday, the pharmacy called my office, because that's how news travels in a small town like ours. Not with a summons, but through the woman working the drive-through window, apologetic, explaining that my mother's arthritis refill had been declined, the card on file wasn't working, and that Diane had stood at the counter insisting there must be some mistake until the line behind her grew restless with opinions. My mother's hands ache badly every June. I know because I've watched her need her lids open slower each year, and I had quietly paid for those pills for 6 years straight, tucked inside the same auto-pay as everything else. I want to be precise here because it matters to me that you understand exactly what I was doing and what I wasn't. The fund itself stayed closed, but I drove over on my lunch break and paid for that single refill in person at the counter, then set the account so that one prescription, only that one, would bill straight to me going forward. No card of hers involved, no fund quietly resurrected. My assistant asked me later why I would pay for anything after what they had done, and I gave her the only honest answer I had, that the fund was a lie I was finished telling, but her joints were not a lesson to be taught. Boundaries, it turns out, need a steady hand, and mine were only 3 days old and still shaking a little, but that particular line felt straight, so I drew it and moved on. By Sunday, I had quietly become a prayer request, never named from the pulpit because my mother is an artist, not a vandal. It moved instead through the women's ministry phone tree in tones of loving concern. Rachel is going through something. She's cut the whole family off. Please pray for Diane. She's holding up so well. And just like that, the community's sympathies started flowing in the correct direction, toward my mother. It arrived by casserole. Neighbors brought scalloped potatoes to Chestnut Hill Road. Another family had my parents over for supper. Somebody's husband offered to fix my father's gutters, since apparently his ungrateful daughter had abandoned them in their golden years. Aunt Linda left me a voicemail that belongs in a museum. 2 full minutes of scripture-adjacent disappointment, ending with the line that she never thought money would change me like this. Money changing me. I sat in my car and laughed until it stopped being funny. 2 of my cousins quietly unfollowed me online. The group thread stayed silent the entire time, and I remained on it technically, the way a name stays on a mailbox long after someone has actually moved out. I did nothing to correct any of it publicly. Partly that was strategy, because you cannot out-narrate a woman who has run the story of an entire town for 40 years on her own home field, but mostly it was older and simpler than strategy, because even in exile, I was still protecting their secret, still holding the roof up with my own silence. On the Monday, Todd's truck pulled up outside my office, and he didn't come upstairs happy, filling the doorway the way he's filled doorways since high school, arms crossed, jaw set first. He said our mother had told him I froze the family's money, the fund, everybody's fund, just because my feelings got hurt at the cookout. I let that sit in the air a moment while Priya suddenly found something urgent to file in the back room. Everybody's fund, I repeated, and asked him one question before I'd answer anything else. In 6 years, how much had he actually put into it? His mouth opened around a number he didn't have. I watched him search for it, the Christmas 25 maybe, the year of his tax refund, watched him do more mental math in 10 seconds than he'd done in 6 years, and watched that math come back small and cold. That's not the point, he said, quieter now, because he builds things for a living and he could hear a support beam creaking somewhere in the story he'd been handed. It is exactly the point. I told him I didn't freeze everybody's money, I stopped giving mine, and those are two very different sentences. He stood there working through it, and then my brother said something that told me the ground under our childhood home had never been as solid as either of us liked to pretend. He said our father had been strange about money ever since the dealership closed, insisting on cash for everything, wouldn't even let Todd quote him on a new furnace back then, and then suddenly the warranty had covered it. He looked at me. I looked back at him. Warranties don't cover an act of a devoted daughter. I said gently, "Go ask your parents, Todd, not me. It was never mine to tell, and it still isn't." He left without slamming the door, which for my brother is basically a white flag of surrender. That Sunday I drove out to Chestnut Hill Road at 10:30, knowing the pews would be holding everyone at church. I hadn't planned a speech because there was nobody home to hear one. On my keyring, between my office key and my car key, hung the brass one, cut for me at 16, carried through every apartment and every purse since. If I had truly been asked to step away, then the door I could always walk through freely wasn't mine to hold on to anymore, and I wasn't going to keep a lie in metal. I sealed it in a plain envelope with no note and taped it to the inside of the storm door where the weather couldn't reach it. Then I stood on that porch a moment in the quiet. The grass had grown 2 weeks long. My father mowed every single Saturday without fail and hadn't. The porch swing chains had rust blooming through them. And the old truck was gone. Not parked out front for church. Simply gone. The truck my father had babied for 20 years. Nowhere in the driveway or the garage. The oil stain on the concrete already fading the way it does when nothing new drips onto it. Through the kitchen window, I could see the wall calendar hanging by the phone, the one my mother has kept since before cell phones existed, and every first of the month for the past several months was circled in red pen, in her own handwriting. My mother, who had never asked a single question about the fund, who managed the story while touching none of the math, had been circling the day my money landed every month for 6 straight years, the way you circle a birthday. She had known the rhythm of me by heart the whole time. She simply never said my name over it. The first of the following month was a Saturday, and this time no phones rang about it at all. It was the first quiet first of the month in 6 years, and I woke at 6 anyway, made coffee, and sat at the table with my phone dark in front of me like an unplugged appliance, my body reaching for a chore that no longer existed. If you have never carried a burden long enough to actually miss it, I hope you never learn how heavy that particular absence can feel. My hands genuinely didn't know what to do with themselves on a first of the month, so I drove, no destination in mind, windows down, out past the edge of town. On a quiet street, I slowed in front of a small brick house with a deep front porch and a for sale sign leaning slightly, as if tired of asking. I sat parked across the street for half an hour. 34 years old, and I could have afforded that house for years. That was the bitter joke of it. The down payment had simply gone out the door $2,400 at a time, buying a story I wasn't even a character in. And sitting there, I finally asked myself the question I had been running from since that garage conversation years earlier. Who was I if nobody needed me? Because I knew exactly how to be the responsible one, the quiet fix, the ground everyone stood on. I had no idea how to simply be somebody's daughter, or somebody's neighbor, or a woman with her own name on a deed. That question frightened me more than the 89 missed calls ever had. I drove home without writing down the realtor's number, taking things one small step at a time. That evening Aunt Linda called, and I almost let it go to voicemail, but something about the hour felt polite enough that I answered. Her voice sounded different, smaller, asking me plainly what exactly the family fund had ever really been. Here is how the truth finally started leaking out, and I promise I didn't spring the leak myself. With my parents visibly struggling, the overgrown lawn, the neglected gutters, the prayer chain working overtime, one of my cousins had floated the obvious suggestion, why not just help Walter and Diane using the family fund, the little rainy day kitty everyone had contributed to for years? So Aunt Linda, who as it turned out was listed on that cheerful cover account my mother had opened for appearances, went to the bank branch and asked for a balance and a history. 6 years of the whole family's generosity, minus my transfers, which had never touched that account at all, came to just over $1,300, birthday 20s, Christmas 50s, one especially proud $100 contribution from my uncle that he had mentioned proudly every year since. Linda stood in that bank lobby staring at a number the entire family believed was their safety net, and the number stared right back and neither of them blinked. She started to ask me what had actually been paying for everything all this time, then stopped because 60 years in this family had taught her exactly what fills a gap that size while saying nothing at all.
Me.
The thumbs up she had tapped so casually was sitting heavy in her lap now. To her credit, and I am stingy with credit where Linda is concerned, she apologized like she genuinely meant it. But my mother was already several steps ahead of us both, because that same week the story shifted again. This second version came to me through Jenna, who had heard it at a church gathering and called me, completely bewildered. Diane was now telling people that I had been secretly controlling my parents' accounts for years, that poor Walter was barely allowed to buy his own coffee, and that the family had finally bravely stepped in and asked me to pull back. My exile had been rewritten as an intervention, and that version was heading straight toward my clients. You have to understand what I do for a living. I keep the books for 24 small businesses in a town where reputation is the only currency that never loses its value. A bookkeeper accused of controlling her own parents' money doesn't stay a bookkeeper for long. It took 11 days before Mr. Ellery, who owns the tire shop and has been my client since I opened my doors, came in unable to quite meet my eyes and asked for his files back. "No offense, Rachel," he said, "it's just there's talk, and my wife's in the Bible study." I had his records boxed, indexed, and transferred to his new accountant within 24 hours, with a checklist so clean it was almost insulting, because the best response to gossip you can't argue with is simply work that speaks for itself. Then I sat in my darkened office after close and let myself feel exactly as angry as I actually was for about 10 minutes. I had stopped paying, and that was allowed. She was now spending my own name to cover the gap, the one asset of mine she could still reach. That night my phone buzzed once, a voicemail from my father, and his voice had a gravel in it I had never heard before. He said the truck was gone, that he had sold it that week to a man from a neighboring county and caught up the electric and insurance bills with the money. "Don't tell your mother I told you," he said. "She's telling everyone we're just storing it for winter." 20 years he had kept that truck running, and I sat holding the phone against my ear long after the message ended. Then came one more text, the longest message I had ever seen my father type in his life, asking me to meet him at the diner the next morning, that he would buy the coffee, that there was something I needed to see before my mother signed anything. The diner has vinyl booths the color of root beer and a waitress who calls everyone honey. My father was already sitting in the back booth, cap off, and he didn't start with the manila folder sitting beside him. He started with the year 1978. He told me my mother had grown up on a farm and that I only knew the postcard version of that story. The farm hadn't just been sold, it had been lost, auctioned off the courthouse steps when my mother was 13 years old. Bad loans on top of a terrible harvest. Her own father had stood in that crowd and watched strangers paint numbers on his hay rake. The church had rallied around them the way churches do. Groceries left on the porch, a collection envelope with their family name read aloud in front of everyone, and donated coats for the kids, good warm ones from families with more than they had. In the collar of the coat my mother received, in careful marker, was somebody else's daughter's name. She wore that coat for 2 winters with the whole school knowing exactly whose it had been. At her own wedding, her father told her never to let this family be the ones people prayed for again. I sat there with my coffee going cold. I had known this woman for 40 years and nobody had ever handed me the key to understanding her before. It didn't excuse a single thing she had done to me, but it explained the engine underneath it all. My mother wasn't lying to hurt me. She had been lying for so long that the lie had become load-bearing, and pulling it out felt to her like the whole sky would come down. My father slid the folder across the table then, and the past stopped mattering quite as much, because this was about the future. Inside was a cheerful yellow flyer advertising senior homeowner relief, and underneath it an application filled out entirely in my mother's neat, careful handwriting, down to the very last line but two, the signatures. I read that application the way a surgeon reads an X-ray. Nearly 14% interest, an origination fee dressed up as a processing courtesy, monthly payments that looked deceptively gentle for the first 2 years before climbing steeply, the whole thing staked against the paid-off house, the one asset my parents actually owned outright in the world. It was exactly the kind of loan that exists because proud people would rather sign with strangers in the dark than say one true sentence to their own family in the daylight. My father said my mother felt things catching up on them, and this way nobody would ever have to know, not even me. I put my palm flat against the paper as though I could physically hold it down. "This isn't a rope, Dad," I told him. "It's an anchor painted to look like one." He said he knew exactly what it was, and his voice cracked for the first time in my entire life, saying he couldn't give my mother the other thing she truly feared, everybody knowing. And there it was, the whole family religion in one sentence. I looked out at the parking lot and considered the only honest choice available to me. I could quietly write a check that very night and become the ground again, and we would all sink back into the same warm lie on a schedule, or I could stay out clean and principled and watch my mother sign that predatory loan within the month. I told him I wasn't writing checks in the dark anymore, not ever again. That part of my life was finished. He nodded slowly, like a man standing at a graveside, and said then she'll sign it in the dark instead. No, I told him there's a third way, but it comes at a cost. I need everyone gathered in one kitchen, and first I need 1 week. If you have never heard of a housing counselor before, write it down somewhere because someday somebody you love may need one, and the appointment itself is free. A counselor named Ms. Alvarez worked out of a shared office near the courthouse, reading glasses on a beaded chain, and treated my parents' finances, which I laid out entirely from memory, like an ordinary plumbing problem, unglamorous but fixable, with no sermon attached. In 1 single hour, I learned more useful things than that yellow flyer ever wanted anyone to discover. The county would put the missed tax installment onto a payment plan, and penalties would stop growing the day that plan was set up. The bank holding the home equity line would much rather restructure the loan than chase a 63-year-old man into default because paperwork is cheaper than lawyers. There was even an owner occupancy tax credit my father had never once filed for, small but very real. Then she took her glasses off and said the hardest true thing of the whole meeting, that this was simply too much house for 2 people on a fixed income, that a house isn't a family, it's a bill with memories attached. I drove home the long way, past that same little brick house, and that night I built the entire plan on 1 sheet of paper, what I would pay to zero out the immediate damage, what I would contribute monthly going forward with a clear end date instead of an open vein, what Todd could reasonably carry, what Linda could contribute that wasn't money at all, and what my parents would have to do in return. Every line survivable. Every single line spoken out loud. I sent the plan to the family thread, the very same one that had voted me off at 42 minutes past 7 that Tuesday. 6 weeks of silence sat above it like packed snow. Sunday at 4 in the afternoon, at my parents' kitchen, I wrote about the family fund. I'll answer every question anyone has ever had. Everyone should come. Replies trickled in by character. Todd said he'd be there. Jenna sent a heart. My uncle asked what fund, followed by laughing, the only honest man in 3 counties. My mother replied privately, 1 line, no greeting at all, there is nothing to discuss. I didn't answer her, because there truly was nothing left to discuss privately. Then, on the main thread where all 12 people could see it and remember everything, Aunt Linda reacted with a thumbs up again. I stared at that same ridiculous little icon and felt something twist in my chest that was half laughter and half forgiveness arriving early. Same gesture, entirely different meaning this time. On the Saturday night, someone knocked on my apartment door, and I assumed it was Todd, forgetting how doorbells work. It wasn't Todd. My mother stood on my landing in her good blue cardigan, hair done, spine straight, purse held in front of her with both hands like a shield, and I realized as we looked at each other through the screen door that in the 4 years I had lived above my office, Diane had never once set foot inside her own daughter's home. She asked if she could come in, though it wasn't really a question, and I opened the door anyway. She sat on the edge of my second-hand couch the way you sit in a doctor's waiting room, her eyes taking one slow lap of the apartment, the folding bookshelf, the window unit, the old car keys sitting in a bowl by the door, and I watched her file every detail somewhere she would never have to look at again. She declined tea. Then my mother, who hadn't spoken to me in 6 weeks, made me the best offer she had ever made anyone. "Come home," she said. "Sunday dinners, your chair, all of it, exactly like before. We'll simply tell people it was a mix-up at the bank. These things happen, nobody really understands computers. The fun goes back to normal, and there's no need for any meeting at all." There it was, everything I wanted, wrapped up in the very thing that was slowly killing me. And because my mother is not a foolish woman, she didn't stop there. She leaned in close and let her voice go soft the way it did whenever I was small and sick, and she used the knife she knows best, telling me I was always happiest when I was helping, that it's who I've always been, and asking why I needed everyone to see it. I want to tell you, I felt nothing hearing that sentence, but I felt everything at once, because that exact sentence had been quietly running my life since that garage conversation years earlier, and she had just said it out loud like a compliment. I told her the meeting was still happening. Her chin lifted. "It's what's best," she said, standing and smoothing her skirt. "It's always been what's best. That's all I've ever done for this family." "What's best for who?" I asked her back quietly. My mother paused for exactly one heartbeat at the door, then let herself out, her footsteps perfectly even all the way down the stairs. I didn't sleep much that night, and for once I let myself look directly at why, because she hadn't been entirely wrong. That's the maddening thing about my mother. She rarely is. I truly had been happiest while helping. Around 2 in the morning, sitting at my kitchen table with a cold mug in front of me, I finally audited the one set of books I had never once opened, my own. 6 years of red-circled firsts of the month, and what had that actually bought me? Not just their solvency. That part was real, and I don't regret a single dollar spent on the roof, the furnace, or the pills. No, the other thing I'd purchased was quieter than that. As long as the money kept going out, I never had to find out whether they would keep me around for free. Every transfer had been a receipt that said needed, and I had been collecting those receipts since I was 28 because needed was a word I knew how to earn, and loved felt like a coin toss I had been too afraid to call in the air. My mother had kept a lie alive to stay off the town's charity list, and I had kept a fund alive to stay off a very similar list of my own. Same church, different pew. In the morning while I pressed my one good blazer, Todd called, his voice strange, warning me that our mother had been calling everyone since 7 that morning, telling them I was coming at 4 to apologize. 4 o'clock that Sunday, and the kitchen on Chestnut Hill Road was fuller than it had been since our grandmother's funeral. My father sat at the head of the table with his hands folded like he was in church. Todd and Jenna sat along the wall on folding chairs. Aunt Linda stood by the stove, having appointed herself in charge of the coffee percolator, which muttered and spat like it knew exactly what was coming. My mother stood at the counter in her Sunday dress at 4 in the afternoon on a day she'd already been to morning service, which told me she had dressed specifically for this, and she had staged the room the way she stages everything, one empty chair set in the middle facing everyone, an apology chair, with an untouched coffee cake sitting nearby that nobody would eat. On the wall by the phone the calendar hung open, the first of the month circled in red, waiting all month long for money that never came. I stood a moment at the storm door before knocking, right where I had once taped the envelope holding the old key, the tape mark still faintly visible, a small ghost rectangle in the corner of the glass. Whoever I had been the last time I touched that door, I wasn't her anymore. My father saw me first and half rose, old manners fighting new shame. My mother didn't turn from the counter, telling the window to come in and say what I'd come to say. The percolator spat again. Linda pulled out the empty chair helpfully, and I looked at it sitting there in the center of the room, built for someone repentant, and told her thanks, but I'd stand. I didn't open with an apology. I said I hadn't brought paper, that you don't forget numbers you've lived, and in the same steady voice I use with clients walking through a hard financial year, I laid out the 6 years out loud, the red envelope in the junk drawer, the pension buyout at pennies on the dollar, the account I opened that same summer, the $2,400 leaving it every first of the month for 72 months. Time to land before the home equity payment, the electric bill, and the insurance draft ever hit ground. The furnace 2 years earlier, over $6,000, Todd, that was never covered by any warranty. Half the roof, $4,800. Our mother's prescriptions, always quietly full. All of it together, a little over $180,000, and I said that number slowly, not for effect, but because a number that size deserves the same respect you'd give a name. Nobody moved. Jenna had both hands pressed over her mouth. Linda sat down without even checking for a chair first. Then I turned to my father, because this part was the entire reason I had come, and told him plainly that he hadn't failed anybody, that the dealership closing was arithmetic, not sin, and that it had never been a secret worth what it cost to protect. My father's shoulders dropped an inch, like a man finally setting down a heavy box. Todd stared at nothing, his lips moving silently as he found the $25,000 somewhere in the wreckage and understood exactly whose money it would have been. The percolator had gone silent. Into that quiet my mother turned from the counter at last, dish towel still folded perfectly over her wrist, and smiled at the room the way she smiles at a stain, asking if I was finished, because she'd like to say something about her daughter's condition, that everyone had seen it, that I isolate myself above that little office, that I had controlled her father's accounts for years. Poor Walter couldn't even buy his own coffee. And that when they finally lovingly asked me to step back, look, what I had done to them in just 6 weeks, this is what money does to a person. Stop, Carol, my father said, and though his voice was not loud, in 63 years I don't believe it had ever once been loud, and the whole kitchen turned as if the refrigerator itself had spoken. He stood, his hand flat on the table on that exact spot he had sworn on 6 years earlier in the garage, and said every word she'd just said about herself was true, every number, every date, that hiding it had been his doing, and it had been wrong, and he was done. One sentence of confirmation, nothing more, nothing less needed. I want to be exact here. He wasn't rescuing me. The truth was already standing plainly in that room. He was simply refusing to sit back down beside the lie one more time. And my mother, my composed, him-voiced mother who had run 4 decades on the fuel of appearing fine, finally came apart at a seam none of us knew existed. She said she would not be a charity case in her own church twice, that people had no idea what they do to families like that, praying for you out loud by name, that her hands were shaking on that folded towel, that she had worn a coat with another girl's name in the collar for 2 winters while everyone smiled at her, and that she would rather be dead than be that again, catching herself before finishing the sentence. One ragged breath filling a kitchen gone so quiet the wall clock sounded like a hammer. Every face at that table had just glimpsed the 13-year-old girl underneath her, and every face turned to me. I could have finished her off completely in that moment. She was down. The room was entirely mine, and 34 years of swallowed words were lined up behind my teeth with their engines running. That is exactly the moment revenge stories are supposed to live for. And standing right inside it, I discovered I didn't actually want it, because winning against my mother would only be another way of staying trapped inside her game. I took the single sheet of paper from my blazer pocket, not evidence, an offer, and laid it flat on the table beside the untouched cake, telling them here is what I can do and the terms it comes with. I would pay the county and the bank the very next morning and zero out everything overdue, about $3,700 altogether, then $1,200 a month for 18 months. Not an endless trap, a number with a clear end date, written down and posted where every person in that room could read it. Todd would contribute what he genuinely could. Linda would drive our mother to appointments and handle picking up her prescriptions. And in exchange, two things had to happen. My parents would sit down with Ms. Alvarez at the housing office, and in the spring the house would go on the market because it was a bill with memories eating them alive. I looked at my mother then and made it as gentle as an ultimatum can possibly be. Told her everything happens in daylight from now on, Mom. Or nothing at all. Those are my only terms. She stared at me across her own kitchen. 6 years ago, I made a decision in the dark. I told her, tonight I'm honoring one made in the light. I was under this family for 6 years. I would like to actually be inside it instead. For a long moment, I genuinely didn't know which way that coin would land. Then my mother set the dish towel down on the counter, squared its edges perfectly the way she has her entire life, and walked out of her own kitchen through her own storm door into her own backyard, the screen door clapping shut behind her. Nobody in that kitchen breathed. My father reached into his shirt pocket behind the folded list I'd given him weeks earlier and took out his pen. He didn't sign right away. He read the whole page out loud first, the overdue figure, the monthly amount, the end date, the meeting, the spring, forcing himself to speak each line aloud and forcing his family to hear it. It was the bravest bit of bookkeeping I have ever personally witnessed. Then he signed and slid the paper down to Todd, and my brother, still technically owed a dream of his own, wrote $200 a month in the margin, initialed it, and said forget the $25,000, in the voice of a man simply paying for a stranger's flat tire out of plain decency. Linda signed up for Tuesdays and the pharmacy runs and cried.